Bill Sullivan is an historian who spent 20 years studying the lost world of the Incas. He believes he has found in the Spanish chronicles of the conquest of Peru a code, and broken it. A code that might even connect the Incas with the builders of the pyramids and of Stonehenge. And with this code, he believes he's unfolded a secret history of the Inca Empire. A secret history which reveals not only why the greatest empire of the Americas was created and why it collapsed, but even why the Incas sacrificed their children. Fernando Elorrieta, unlike most Inca experts, grew up here in the heart of the sacred valley of the Incas. Inca myths and legends were part of his childhood. Fernando, like Bill, was aware that the Incas were infatuated with astronomy. Bill's idea that Inca gods were planets and that the black clouds visible in the Milky Way were the Incas' constellations fitted in with everything he knew. He'd spent 20 years searching in the Sacred Valley, following clues in the myths, and believed he had the visible proof Bill needed.
I was amazed when I saw Fernando's book, because I had assumed until that moment that the mental world of the Incas that I had been exploring through the mythology, that its major manifestation was in the myths. When I found Fernando's work, I saw immediately that the entire mental map of the Inca world was laid out in the Sacred Valley. When he began to explain to me that the animals which are represented as black clouds in the Milky Way actually exist in the valley in the form of huge effigies carved by means of agricultural terraces into the mountainsides. So that the entire Sacred Valley is a reflection of the Milky Way and the constellations in it.
There are many constellations represented in the valley, and maybe others which we still haven't found, hidden among the mountains. One day we'll manage to reveal all that the valley contains. So far we found images of the constellations, the condor, toad, llama, tree and the serpent. They're all along the valley.
Constellations for the Incas were the dark patches within the Milky Way. Inca astronomy focused on the Milky Way because, unlike us, they could see its full glory. What Fernando explained to Bill was that people hadn't seen the Milky Way effigies for centuries because they weren't meant for just anybody. The whole idea was to create imagery that was reserved for the initiated who knew how to see it, just like their myths. Fernando told Bill how to look at the land and sent him to the road above the town of Pisac, where, he told him, he'd find a giant effigy of a condor.
The condor was another of the black cloud constellations in the Milky Way. And in this one, the neck and the beak parts are made of agricultural terracing. The whole right side of the mountain is the right wing, and coming towards us, the left wing. And the condor is lifting off, and under its wings are pre-Columbian grave sites. And it's because the condor eats only carrion. It's associated with death. And its function here is as a mythical image carrying the souls of the dead to the hereafter.
The condor at Pisac looms 2,000 feet high above the valley floor, a mile across. At its base is one of the largest necropolises in Peru. At its peak is one of the Incas' most sacred temples. Its terraces are precipitously steep and impractical. It seems an absurd place for agriculture, given the availability of flat land in the valley bottom.
The terraces on the back and on the neck as well are placed in a pretty precarious spot. They're useful and they're still farmed today, but you can also look at any other part of the mountain and say, why didn't they put terraces there if terraces is what they were primarily interested in? You can see that they're using the terraces as a sculptural element.
Next, Fernando told Bill to look out for an image of a giant toad alongside the road back from the Pisac condor. An unlikely assignment.
That object there, that hill, is called the Toad, Hampatu in Quechua, and the people who live here call the plain beneath it Hampatu Pampa, and there's a lot of toads down there.
So here on the ground was another of the creatures from the myths, the Toad constellation is known to lie near what we call the Southern Cross. And in case Bill still wasn't convinced, Fernando had sent him to look for a second condor, which overlooked the town of Urubamba.
This one's an old condor, and you can see that he's kind of shoulders hunched. You're looking at his back and he's taking off. I like them both. This one has its own character. But like the one in Pisac, it also has pre-Columbian graveyards right at the base of the wings. There's a certain amount of skepticism that you have to have when you look at these, and of course the one in Pisac is more convincing. This one is almost completely natural, except perhaps for the eye. But yeah, the graveyard's the ringer because it fits in with the mythology we know and with the cosmology, and sort of a cross-check.
Last and most important for Bill was the constellation that had been central to the myths he decoded, the Llama. According to Fernando, its effigy was in the heart of the sacred valley, overhanging his hometown, Ollantaytambo.
From this vantage point, you can see the head of the llama with the nose pointing to the left, and below the head is the front legs, and there's a big rock outcrop in the middle, and that's represents the fleece of the llama, and the hindquarters and the hind legs are the terraces further to the right.
What Fernando's discoveries show above all else was the commitment of the Incas to their ideas. The sheer manpower required to sculpt gigantic effigies into the sides of the mountains gave Bill the solid proof that the characters in the myths were important to the Incas. For the first time, myths, astronomy, and artifacts on the ground had come together.
Well, the first time that I climbed to the vantage point where your eye can resolve the image of the pyramid was on a June solstice, and all I could think of was who built this, and what an amazing thing it is to build an invisible pyramid. When Fernando and Edgar first became aware of the existence of this pyramid in the mid-90s, the first thing that they did was to go to their Indian friends here in the valley and said, well, what's the deal with this pyramid? And everybody said, what pyramid? Well, it's about 1,000 feet on its side, which makes it larger than the base of the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
25 million cubic feet, 1.5 million tons of rock and soil, all moved by hand, a feat which dwarfed everything else Fernando found. And all to make a pyramid which from almost every angle you look at it is invisible, just like the myths, just like the effigies. It's remained unknown because you can only see it well if you make the 2-hour climb up the mountain on the other side of the river to lookouts from where, Fernando thinks, the construction of the pyramid was directed. Only from here does the illusion work properly, and its full layout, including the terraced sunken fields called windows,